ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation History number 25. And we are going to be looking at women and the military from ancient times up until today. To give people time to join us, I'm going to start us off with a tune.
Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness on flooded folk and wall. Your new God's sullen peoples have devil and have child. Take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror and check the show of pride. By open speech and simple, 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. Fill full the mouth of famine and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, what's love and heed and folly, bring all your hopes to naught. Take up the white man's burden, no tawdry rule of kings, but toil of serf and sweeper, the tale of common things. The ports ye shall not enter, the roads ye shall not tread. Go make them with your living and mark them with your dead. Take up the white man's burden and reap his old reward. The blame of those ye better, the hate of those ye guard. The cry of hosts ye humor are slowly towards the light. Why brought ye us from bondage, a loved Egyptian night? Take up the white man's burden, ye dare not stoop to less, nor call too loud on freedom to cloak your weariness. By all ye cry or whisper, by all ye leave or do, the silent, sullen people shall weigh your gods and you. Take up the white man's burden, have done with childish days, the lightly profit laurel, the easy young grudge praise. Come down to search your manhood through all of thankless years. No age with give or wisdom, the judgment of your peers. Take off the white man's burden through all of thankless years.
And that was, of course, the excellent Chris Gard. Do go and check out his YouTube channel if you like good music. Chris Gard's a good bloke, and he makes really good music. Excuse me. Now, I'm going to start this stream off with an apology, because I did tell people that this week we were going to be doing the Australian Battle of Long Tan. The reason I didn't do it is that a channel on YouTube that I follow called Hyper Hysterical History, hyper hysterical history, dropped a 4-hour odd stream on Longtan, and I didn't think there was much point in doing it. Hyper hysterical history is an Australian. He's got a very good military history channel. He did 2 very long videos on the Falklands War. The first one's about the war at sea. Second one's the war on land. Do go and check out Hyper Hysterical History on YouTube. We probably will do Longtan, but a later date. So as a replacement, I decided we'd do women and the military. And I want to make this a fairly broad stream. I want to look at women's involvement in war and in the military from ancient times until today. It's not an anti-woman stream. It's not even an anti-women in the military stream. It is, from my point of view, an anti-women in the front line stream, but that's a different story. I did ask Mitch to come on. I don't know if he's going to join us or not, because Mitch, I know, has a pretty good knowledge of women in Anglo-Saxon times, and also amongst the Norse, amongst the Vikings, and shield maidens and all that kind of stuff, which I know something about, but not as much as Mitch does. So maybe he will still join us. I hope he does. But the ancient Greek myth of the Amazons, of course, is quite well known, but it was totally a myth. There were no such thing as Amazons. Apparently, some Scythian women did fight on horseback as bow women, but I don't know how common it was. And that was about the closest you got to this stuff in the ancient world. King Piraeus, the guy from whom we get the term Pyrrhic victory, was a very well-known Greek king, ancient Greek king, and a good general and commander who fought against the Romans and even beat them, but at a heavy cost, hence Pyrrhic victories. He was eventually apparently killed by a woman, but he was storming a town and he was killed by a woman who chucked a bloody great roof tile onto his head, and he wasn't wearing a helmet for some unknown reason and therefore died. But, you know, that would women fight in defense of their towns in that sort of way? Yes, of course they would, because particularly in the ancient world, if a town was captured by the enemy, normally the women would face rape and enslavement afterwards. So you can kind of understand why they might do that. Aaron, what would you like to say to start us off?
Yeah, I'd just say that before, let's say, the 19th century, so let's roughly say the Peninsular War, women's involvement was, as you said, Duke, that in terms of active military involvement, it was the civilians, if they were in a town that was being attacked. Beyond that, it really wasn't much.
No. You got, I mean, you mentioned the Peninsular War, and a company of somewhere between 60 and 100 guys would be allowed to take, I think it was 6 wives with them, like ordinary soldiers' wives. And they would generally do stuff like, they do the laundry for the men.
Yeah.
They do some cooking for them sometimes, and also they would sometimes help look after guys who were sick or wounded. You know, pretty natural feminine roles, to be honest.
And mentioning that about washerwomen were an important structure to any army in terms of its sort of logistics. And they were quite valued. Well,
the French, of course, had official women who were cannoneers, I think they were called, something like that. But they were officially part of their regiment's strength. And they were generally, they did supplies, they ran canteens for the men. They were sometimes prostitutes, it has to be said. And you know, that sort of thing. The official involvement of women in the military really goes to the mid-1850s, when you had Florence Nightingale, who was treating sick and wounded British soldiers and sailors in the Crimea, or well, actually in Turkey, but from the Crimea. And that's the original official involvement in terms of British women with the military, was nursing, which of course is a perfectly natural and feminine thing to do. And women, it's been shown, actually female nurses help men recover quicker because they're good for morale. If you can imagine someone who was in the trenches of World War One or in the jungles of Burma or fighting the Germans in Normandy in 1944, it's nice to have pretty girls looking after you if you get wounded by the enemy. And that tends to help your recovery because it helps your morale. And you carry on, Aaron.
I will just add that actually nursing was the main component in terms of the British Armed Forces until pretty much the Second World War. Women were usually involved in terms of the military itself. You don't get them sort of properly involved in the military, or for that matter, for the RAF or the Royal Navy, until the late 30s as a permanent thing. Before that, it's almost always in a sort of mainly nursing roles.
Yes, absolutely right. And I'm going to come back to that because I want to address a myth that is quite common in modern Britain. Mitch, good evening, mate. How are you going?
Same old.
I was just going to talk a little bit about women in Anglo-Saxon England and also in the Norse and Viking women, but now you're here, you can talk about it because you know more about it than I do. So would you like to address, I know it's a modern myth that you had Anglo-Saxon noble women who were leading British armies, which to me is a nonsense, but you know more about this stuff than I do.
Well, I mean, okay, as for the Anglo-Saxons, especially in the time of Alfred the Great, nope. I don't think there's been a single archaeological discovery of a single woman of that time period fighting on our side. For obvious reasons. I mean, you got the fact that women were tiny back then. Can you imagine like a 4 foot being in a shield wall?
Yes, where it's even women make piss poor infantry soldiers even today, but back then it would have been far worse because you're using spears and swords and shields, and physical strength is absolutely vital. You're going to die pretty quickly in a shield wall if you're not physically quite strong.
Yeah, and it's Bjark is mentioned, because there is a tribe, and to be fair, this is folklore, so it's a matter of it's mythology, but it's all about tribal origins. There's the Lombards, they're originally called Langobards or Longbeards, because they reckon that one time this tribe was being assailed by some other Germanic tribe, and as a bluff, the women disguise themselves as men by having their long hair look like beards, like they put their long hair in front of their faces, so they look like beards. That was a massive bluff, so that the enemy think that the Lombards are still a strong force. And yeah, the other thing was back in ancient times in the Cimbrian War, you'd have like these wagonburgs at the rear, so that if any warriors were fleeing, the women would just gang up on them and kill them. Because this is not just this is a thing about among Anglo-Saxons, but also Vikings, in that if a man displayed cowardice, the woman would be so ashamed that she probably would kill herself and her children, because cowardice was the worst sin to be committed amongst warriors. But there's
something that some historians think shows that on Trajan's column.
Trajan's what? Sorry?
Trajan's column in Rome, which shows Dacian wars. There's a scene on that which some historians think is that a woman killing her children before she kills herself amongst the Dacians, obviously not the Romans.
Yeah, this was a common thing because it's like people will regard the Japanese as uniquely barbaric because of their stuff about seppuku and whatnot, but we did that back in pagan times where it was death before dishonor. So if you're a woman, for example, there's a famous story of a Roman woman by the name of Lucretia, who she was raped by a Gaul, I believe, a barbarian. She then told her husband, and he sought vengeance. But the thing was, because she allowed another man into her bed, but even though he was raped, she had to kill herself because that was just a social code at the time, which was if a woman allowed herself to be sexually used by any man who was not her husband, she had to kill herself.
Yeah, we were saying before you joined us, Mitch, that King Piraeus, the guy who we get horrific victory from, he was killed probably by a woman. It's the ancient sources tell us, but he was storming a town, and he was this chick was throwing bloody great roof tiles down on the enemy's head, and he didn't have his helmet on, so he got killed. But women used to do that because in ancient times, if a town was stormed, the women would, if they weren't killed, would be raped, and they'd also be enslaved. So in that sort of desperate situation, yeah, sure, women might fight in the sense of like chucking bloody great rocks and things down on people's heads from roofs. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and also another thing, women would be used for logistics. So, for example, there's a group in Afghanistan called the Hazara. Hazara means 10,000 in Persian, because they reckon that a Mongolian army of 10,000, because Mongolian armies were based upon like 2 men or tens of thousands each.
Sure.
And one such army moved into Afghanistan because the thing was the area was massively depopulated by the collapse of the Khwarezmian Empire when Genghis Khan destroyed the place. So it wasn't just the army, but you also had all their women and children coming with them, and that's the roots of some of these, like, the dialects of Mongolian are still spoken in Afghanistan to this day because of situations where certain ethnic groups would move, and it wasn't just the men; it was also women and children, because logistically it was possible, because women and children always had to come with the army anyway, because let's say an average Mongolian warrior, he's got 10 horses. Well, he has to have his women and children taking care of the other 9 horses while he's riding the 10th into battle. Or you've got Napoleon when he invades Russia. You've got things like 500,000 guys, but you've also got plenty of like camp followers and women, other women, like.
Yeah, we were talking about this, Mitch, before you joined us. A British infantry company was allowed to take 6 wives with them when they went overseas, and generally speaking, like the ordinary wives of the non-commissioned guys, and they would generally do things like the laundry for the men. And obviously, if the soldiers got sick or were wounded, they would sometimes look after them, and they would sometimes do some cooking and this sort of stuff. But it was very much support roles, as you say.
Yeah, it's one thing that's one. I can't remember the precise wording, but basically that one thing the army always dreaded was, say, their baggage train being attacked in the midst of a battle, because it wasn't just the baggage and the supplies being attacked; it was also the women and any children the army took with them. So you'd always have like
Agincourt, Mitch. We're next week we're going to be doing Henry V as our history stream. I'm going to be doing that with Mitch and whoever else wants to join us. Of course, Henry V, if you watch Shakespeare's Henry V about the Battle of Agincourt, Henry gets really angry when some of the French peasants attack the English baggage train and kill the kids there, because there are children there as well as women and stuff, as you say, Mitch.
Yeah, and that sparked off what I mean. The French often have like this sort of like moralizing moment where they go, "Oh, we English are barbaric because we killed off French prisoners," but like that was a tit for tat thing in the context of, well, what do you expect an army to do when their women folk have been probably raped and slaughtered by a rampaging French cavalry?
Yeah, and and not just women. There were children there. There were esquires and all sorts of people in the British baggage train, who these French peasants, led by some French lords, cowardly attacked in the rear. And it was that, as Mitch says, which sparked the Henry V was then worried because he had so many French prisoners and he was so outnumbered that he was worried that his army could still lose. So instead of so they did kill some of the prisoners. They didn't kill that many of them, to be honest, but they did kill some of them.
Well,
But,
it's
yeah,
like, yeah, because the thing was he killed off a lot of nobility, which at that time it was peasants were screwed, but if you were an aristocrat, you expected a ransom. Basically, you expected, and you know, like, and if you were put in prison, you basically put in like house arrest more than actual prison, as as like a dungeon. But
yeah,
Henry V.
absolutely. Of course, the other thing about that, Mitch, was that if you were, say, an English longbowman or an English man at arms rather than a knight, if you captured a French aristocrat, that was your fortune made. You know, that was one way you could make money as an ordinary soldier in the army, was if you captured a French aristocrat. You probably wouldn't get all his ransom, but you'd get some of it.
Yeah, and I know. I mean, I don't know if I think it's a director's cut of Troy, which Morgoth and Endeavour did. But in Troy, right, you've got the sacking of Troy, where it just shows what happens when a city is sacked by an occupying army. That's why Pyrrhus of Epirus got a wee ripped off. And I have to wonder why he didn't have a helmet on, because you got to factor if he's beneath a house. I mean, you got to factor the Mediterranean houses are like close together, so you can have like a woman on top of a house easily, just doing a conceal hit and run attack with a bunch of riv tiles or whatever on soldiers below.
Well, the first thing you bought in the ancient and medieval world, if you could afford any armor at all, the first thing you got was a helmet of some sort, because a big blow on the head's going to kill you. On the other hand, if you were a leader, if you were a lord or a king or somebody like that, you would sometimes take your helmet off just to show yourself to your men that you were still alive. You know, it's a trope in Hollywood that the stars of the movie, if it's set in ancient or medieval times, they never wear helmets, because the directors don't want the audience not to know who they are. But in fact, it's the first thing you buy for yourself is a helmet. Henry V again is a brilliant example. Henry V's most famous portrait is a side-on view, and part of the reason for that is he had a very bad wound in his jaw, in his face, on the other side of his face, where he was hit by an arrow during a siege, and that's because he had either taken his helmet off or lifted his visor so that people could see him and he could see better himself. And only because he was a king, or actually, I think he was a prince at the time.
Battle of Shrewsbury, that was falling off.
And only because he was such a rich and important guy. A surgeon actually made a special tool to take the arrowhead out. If he'd have been an ordinary soldier, he would have almost certainly died from that.
Yeah, and it's. And then, like, you know, you imagine, for example, let's say a woman. I mean, she wouldn't have to worry about, you know, getting killed point blank by an archer, because, as I said, women were a lot tinier back then than we are now. So I suppose it'd be hard. But like, as I said, like, warfare back then was very physical. It was very upfront with like halberds and swords and axes and so on.
Mate, the most popular post I ever did on X, on Twitter, and we're live on X at the moment. But the most popular post I ever did on it was a couple of little British Army chicks who could not get over a 5-foot wall. They just
I'm sort of thinking, was it like the women were like what 5'1" or something? I'm sort of thinking, right? So let's say you get a 5'6" bloke who's never stepped foot inside a gym, go against a 5'1" woman who's been to a gym for, let's say, 4 months or whatever. That 5'6" bloke. Yeah, she'll still lose. It doesn't matter how much she trains. It's just men naturally bigger built. We've got denser bones.
Yeah, we got bigger bones. We've got more muscles. It's just nature. I'm sorry, you can't change nature. You know.
Yeah, it's like yeah, like the whole idea of like, for example, World War One. I mean, there was one case of like a journalist woman by the name of Dorothy Lawrence who disguised herself as a bloke in order to get into the army. But to my knowledge, I don't think she participated in any battles. She was just doing it for journalism.
Yep. Could you address, Mitch, because I know this is something you know a fair bit about, the Viking shield maiden thing, which was a Norse myth. It wasn't supposed to be real. It was a bit like the ancient Greeks and their Amazon thing. You know, would you like to address?
You got facts of it. Back then, the average Norseman would look at the concept of Valkyries in the same way that guys like Aaron and I probably look at someone like Lara Croft in popular media. It's kind of one of the things where you go, or perhaps it's something entertaining, but ultimately you're not going to take it as like if you if you look at Lara Croft, right? I mean, average height woman. Yeah, she's not going to exactly be strong and robust enough to deal with a physical challenge and stuff like that. But it's kind of entertaining enough to think of it that way, even though you don't take it seriously. Likewise, you got the Valkyries. One thing people don't know about the Valkyries was so everyone knows they take the men's souls to Valhalla, but they don't know that when the Valkyries have taken the souls, what they also do is they consume corpses of the men. So Valkyries are by nature cannibalistic. That's one thing that is always left out of mainstream portrayal of the Valkyries, because even like the Valkyries themselves aren't exactly meant to be, I don't know, they're not meant to be Mary Sue's, shall we say. They're not meant to be like these glorious
they're supernatural, yeah. They're not ordinary women. They're supernatural, yeah.
Yeah, and it's I know, for example, one of the most famous one thing. So there's a collection of Anglo-Saxon poems called Widsith. One of them is about Attila the Hun. He's called Attilon in Old English. He marries a Germanic woman. I can't remember the original name, but in Hungarian it still survives as the name Ildiko. Yeah, she marries him and she kills him on their wedding night with a sword or something. But that was an assassination. For example, that was one of the most famous instances of a Germanic woman, killing a man one-on-one. But that was assassination. That wasn't exactly like a fight on fair terms.
Yeah, he was kind of sleeping or something, and she kills him. Yeah, I get that. Bodvar Bjarki, by the way, is a good friend of the channel, and a mate of mine. So yeah.
Yeah, I'd say Bjarki. I mean, Bjarki probably is more well read about Germanic paganism in some ways, and in many ways, than I am. So he's probably like, for example, there's a song by Heilung. It's like pagan. I don't know what genre you call it, but they're like a Germanic pagan musical act. They've got a song called Svanrond, which is all about the names of the Valkyries, and you got facts of that. I suppose you can look at the Valkyries also another means of let's say you're a Norse woman and you're thinking of a name, but you can't think of one to give your daughter. You just think of the names of the Valkyries for inspiration. So
I used to watch the Canadian show Vikings, and it wasn't bad when it started, although I was never very keen on the biker leather armor that they always used in that crappy show. But it got worse and worse as it went on, and you eventually ended up with all these chicky babes being warriors, which was just nonsense. It didn't happen. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I remember specifically thinking. I don't know if it originated with the Norse. I know that there was some superstition among the Norse regarding sailing, which was they didn't like sailing with women, especially redheads from Ireland and Scotland, because that was a particular logging of it. Because essentially, the superstition goes that if you have a redhead on board a ship, all the men will fight each other for the affections of that one redhead woman. So that was always seen as a bad luck kind of curse. But also, and also it'd be funny. So the Finnish at this time, they were seen as like sorcerers, like seen as a very scary people because their language, of course, like when you hear Finnish spoken very angrily, is a very scary language in the eyes of the Norse. And they said that if you have a Finnish woman, especially on board a ship, then it's basically inviting storms upon you, and that is bad luck. Like it's basically a curse. And
Yeah,
one way
that
to-
even, Mitch, that even carried on into Britain and not taking women to sea. Although it has to be said, Nelson's Navy did have some women who were on ships, and the reason for that was that people like the gunner, for example, the gunner was a non-commissioned officer on a warship in Nelson's day, and they were what was called permanent officers. In the people like the gunner always stayed with the ship, even when she was in ordinary, which is to say in reserve. They would always stay there, and the gunner, for example, was allowed to have his wife on the ship. But again, as with the British Army wives in the same era, she would do stuff like look after the sick. She might sometimes look after the young midshipmen, because some of the midshipmen and the ship's boys, who were like young kids, even as young as 10 sometimes, she might help look after them. She might help look after the sick and wounded, but she wouldn't fight the guns. That wasn't her job.
Yeah, and there's a guy mentioning what World War II. I mean, I don't know. I don't really know too much about because to my knowledge, I don't think there was anything on our side where there were
No,
women.
not in the West.
Yeah,
not in
there were the red witches, but on the Soviet side. But
I was
from
just
our
going to mention those. I was just going to mention them, Mitch. There's actually there's a Russian TV series at the moment on YouTube you can go and watch, which is they're not called witches, they're called something nicer than that, because obviously they're on the Russian side. But yeah, it was the Germans who called them the Red Witches, because they used to fly old-fashioned biplanes over the German positions at night and drop little bombs on them, which wouldn't do a great deal of damage, but it would keep the soldiers awake and damage their morale, basically.
Yeah, it's like the Women's Battalion of Death that the Kerensky government had in 1917, where a lot of it was just propaganda, because so the Women's Battalion of Death, they were the only troops who tried to defend the Winter Palace against the Bolsheviks. Expectedly, what happens is this women's battalion, they all get taken captive, and nothing good happens to them afterward, like the Bolshevik troops.
We have to be careful because we're on YouTube, and YouTube doesn't like the word that begins with R, but that's kind of what happened to most of them.
Yeah, and but it was a propaganda thing, because the thing was, they say, okay, well, we have these women join the army, and it shames the men. Well, it didn't really work, because the Kerensky offensive still failed, and many just desert because at that point, because you got to factor. I'm going to slightly off topic, but let's just say, like, no one really wanted to fight for Kerensky anyway. They preferred the Tsar, but this tactic of trying to shame the men into fighting for using women as frontline troops, if anything, actually irks off a lot of peasants who were quite religious and very conservative, patriarchal, etc. All he did was just irk them off and alienate them even more, if anything.
Aaron, anything you would like to add to what we've been talking about here, mate?
Yeah, only that I've got to say, I don't know much about the sort of the ancient world, the Anglo-Saxon world, but as Mitch has said, there was no frontline roles in sort of British or American forces in either World War, and you don't get that, I don't think, until the 90s, at least in the British Army.
Yes, absolutely true. We'll come on to that in a minute, Aaron.
Yeah.
I'd just like to say what you did get in World War II, for example, is there were British and probably American, I'm not sure, but there were certainly British female ferry pilots who used to take aircraft for the RAF from one base to another and stuff like that. But they used to do that in order that the actual male combat pilots didn't have to do it. I think you also had one or two anti-aircraft batteries that were manned by women, although it's not strictly speaking a combat role in that, all right, there is some chance you might get bombed, but generally the enemy weren't trying to bomb the anti-aircraft batteries, they were trying to bomb the stuff they were defending, if you see what I mean.
Just what I'll do is just to come up with what goes in the British Army before World War II, is that other than in World War, that essentially before World War II, you've got two sort of things going on with the British Army and women. You've either got charitable bodies which take on a military structure and which are sort of endorsed by the army, but aren't part of the army. So that would be like the First Aid Nursing Yeomanry, which had the nick known as Fanny, which still goes today. And those on one side, and they were particularly during World War one of them nursing and driving ambulances. You had temporary branches of the army, so you had the World War One. You had the women's auxiliary corps, women's army auxiliary corps, out of which you get the short-term version of the World War One short-term version of the Women's Royal Air Force, and then the Wrens initially, and then those three branches, sort of women's branches, are essentially disbanded in the early 20s, and then they're revived in 38, 39, and they remain. They are revived in the case of the army as the ATS, the Auxiliary Territorial Service, and then the Wrens, and then I'll just double check the name. It's the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, and then it becomes the Women's Royal Air Force after the Second World War again. So,
and 100. Look, I want to address, as I said, the first real official involvement of women in the military, in Britain anyway, was probably Florence Nightingale and her volunteer nurses who went out to Scutari in Turkey to treat wounded and sick British soldiers and Royal Navy sailors during the Crimean War. Now, one thing I want to address on this stream, because it's a vile lie that is very common in Britain these days, and I think they even teach in schools, is that there was this West Indian woman called Mary Seacole, who was put up, is put up today as some sort of equivalent of Florence Nightingale. Now, Florence Nightingale was the mother of modern nursing. She really was. Mary Seacole ran an expensive hotel for officers in the Crimea. She was not a nurse. She never claimed to be a nurse. And if you were anything like a sergeant or below, you couldn't afford her prices. Not a chance. She ran a very expensive hotel for profit for British officers in the Crimea. She was not a nurse. She was nothing like Florence Nightingale, who would treat privates and everybody else. You know, there's a reason she was known as the lady with the lamp and all this sort of stuff. Mary Seacole wasn't like that at all. She ran a fucking hotel for profit, and she could only be her prices could only be afforded by relatively rich British officers. She was not the same sort of woman at all. And Dissident Knight, you are not entirely wrong about that, what you're saying there, mate. You're not. If Mary Seacole was some sort of heroine, which, by the way, is what you call a female hero, they're not heroes, they're heroines. If Mary Seacole was some sort of hero, then there were various madams in and around Alexandria in World War II who ran hotels. Many of them were French, Jewish, or Egyptians. Many of those people who ran brothels stroke hotels for British officers around Alexandria, which you certainly wouldn't get into if you were an NCO or a private. Then they were heroines too, then apparently. It's just bullshit, basically. Florence Nightingale was a very posh lady, and she took a load of other very posh ladies over to the Crimea, over to Turkey anyway, to treat ordinary as well as officer casualties from the Army and the Royal Navy. And she was a genuine heroine, and she is the genuine mother of modern nursing. Mary Seacole is a con job. I don't know if Mitch or Aaron has anything to add to that, but it was one of the things I wanted to do on this stream.
Yeah, just about Mary Nightingale. Sorry, Florence Nightingale. She was, as you say, she was the mother of modern nursing. But ironically enough, she felt she had failed. Strange as it seems, failed in that during the Crimea. She spent her entire rest of her life trying to make up for it, which, looking back at what she did, seems astonishing, but for reasons only known to herself, she felt that she'd failed somehow, which I've never understood.
I never worked that out, Aaron. I mean, look, she took over the hospital, in air quotes, at Scrutari, which when she arrived was an old Turkish barracks. It was filthy. It was laden with fleas. There was no air anywhere, and she turned it into the prototype of a modern hospital with proper beds, proper ventilation, and people coming around at regular hours to make sure the soldiers who were wounded and sick were getting better, basically. She was a genuine heroine.
Yeah. Actually, it's interesting. I did, when I was at secondary school, I did history for GCSE, and one of them was the history of medicine. And my history teacher, who I'm fond of, but was a bit of a lefty, interestingly made it quite clear to us that Mary Seacole was not a nurse, and Florence Nightingale was. She was very clear on that.
Absolutely, Aaron. It's a real insult to Florence Nightingale to compare her to the runner of a hotel like Mary Seacole, who, like I said, if you had no money, you couldn't even get into her establishment, never known anything else. No fucking private or sergeant from a British regiment was getting into her hotel. She did what she did for profit, and she was in no way a nurse. It's absolute nonsense.
Yeah.
If you wanted to go and have a good time and you were rich enough, you could go to Mary Seacole's establishment and you could drink brandy and whiskey and what have you and have a nice time. And I'm fairly sure there were probably some women there too. But she weren't Florence Nightingale. Trust me, she was not. It's a fucking lie. And it's a lie which is taught in British schools apparently these days. Mary Seacole was out for profit, and that's all she cared about. She didn't nurse anybody. Mitch, you got anything you want to talk about at the moment?
No, I can't think of anything.
All right, well, let's move on a bit. We talked about historical stuff. Let's move to more modern times. So, First, Second World War, and just afterwards, women were allowed into auxiliary forces in Britain, at least. And this is a British channel, so we'll talk about Britain. But it equally applies to Australia, Canada, New Zealand. To a large degree, South Africa, and even to the US, to be honest. Women were allowed in to perform auxiliary roles that freed up men to do more important stuff. This is how the women in the military started. So the Wrens, of course, are probably the most famous of these people, and our thumbnail is some Wrens being cute girls. I love women. I think they're great, but they're not good at war. But there are absolutely many vital roles that women can do that free up men to do more important stuff that is actual fighting. So, for example, the Wrens, which was the Women's Royal Naval Service, were doing shore-based roles that freed up sailors to actually go to sea in warships and fight the enemy. That's what they were designed for. The Women's Auxiliary Air Force in World War II, as I said, there were women ferry pilots who would take warplanes from one base to another or deliver aircraft to bases. And that meant that Royal Air Force pilots didn't have to do that because the women would do it. They would also man, in air quotes, the sector stations that in the Battle of Britain, for example, advised the squadrons where to go using information from radar and the Royal Observer Corps and all this stuff. And these girls would tell the RAF squadron commanders and flight commanders where to take their aircraft. Again, a role that women can do perfectly well. They did shore-based radio station work. They often did work on intercepts from German and Italian and Japanese radio messages. They would write down what they heard and it would get translated and all this kind of stuff. So women can do all those jobs perfectly well and great, no problem whatsoever. Loafer Sheffield is talking about Saul Sabaton. I have no idea what you mean, but whatever. But yeah, women can do those things. There are many vital roles. I mean, in Britain, you have the Queen Alexandra's Royal Nursing Corps, which are the military nurses. And I went out with one of those girls once, nice girl, and like most nurses, down to earth and a good girl. But again, it's not a combat role, it's a support role. And women can do all those things really well. And they actually, as we said earlier, can help more soldiers recover from wounds because it improves their morale to see nice ladies around, that it just does. Mitch?
I was just going to add, oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say I haven't got much to say about this.
One thing I will add is that another role they did, particularly this is the ATS, and then what then became the Women's Royal Army Corps after the Second World War, so from 1949 onwards, was driving. That was something that was a big role. I know this because my grandmother was in the Women's Royal Army Corps from 1952 to 1956. Actually, the first thing she was trained to do was a drive. And in fact, she passed the driving test on one of the old Austin KT ambulances, so 3-ton ones.
Didn't even her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, that's what she did in World War II.
Yeah.
The driver. Yeah.
And that was, and actually a lot of the women who they were taught to drive, but they were also taught to maintain the engines because for example, if you broke down, you either had to be able to fix it yourself or know what the problem is so that you can inform whoever it was going to come and fix it so they can get it to us out quickly. And so my grandmother could essentially was effectively a mechanic who could deal with anything from pedal bike up to a 3-ton lorry. He talks about dealing with the engines. That's what she left the art.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Aaron. And again, I got nothing against women doing jobs like that. Although I do have a bit of a problem with women running convoys of trucks supporting fighting men, and there has been quite a lot of problems with that. Even recently in Iraq and Afghanistan, there were problems with women doing that. I remember there was one American woman who was lauded as a heroine when she was captured by the Iraqis, when the rebellion was going on in Iraq. And actually, when she was eventually released, and they had all sorts of American Army and US Marine Corps units looking for this poor girl, and they eventually got her back. But and they made a movie about her where she was like incredibly brave and fighting and all the rest of it. When they got her back, she said, "No, it was bullshit. I never even fired my rifle." She actually admitted that. She said, "No, I never fired it. It wasn't her who turned her into a heroine. It was the lefty liberals who want women in the armed forces." She didn't lie. She told the truth. She said, "No, never fired my rifle once." And this is why you can't have women in the front line, because they won't. I mean, I've been out in my life with 3 women who were in the military. One of them, as I said a little while ago, was Queen Alexandra's nurse. And she was just your basic, down-to-earth, good nurse. I went out with a Greek, whatever the Greeks call their wrens, once, but I won't really count that because it was just while I was on holiday in Crete. And she was a really nice girl. And I also went out with a British Army girl for a little while, and she once turned around and told me I couldn't really shoot anyone. And this was about the time when, because the British Army is constantly being cut, like all of the British Armed Forces. In the past, the Women's Royal Army Corps bases were guarded by male soldiers. But because the British Army is constantly being cut by the British government, which hates British people and hates British interests, no matter whether they're Conservative or Labour, it makes no difference. They're all traitorous bastards, basically. There weren't enough British male soldiers to guard their bases anymore, so women had to start guarding their own bases. And this chick said to me, she said, I couldn't really shoot anyone. You know, she was in British Army, Women's Royal Army Corps, but she admitted, no, I couldn't shoot anyone. So having her as on stag, having her as a sentry was a complete waste of time, because if you'd been like, I don't know, an Arab terrorist or the provisional IRA, you could have walked right past her because she wouldn't have shot you. True story. Sorry. Like, don't get me wrong, women can be extremely brave, especially if they are defending their own children or something like that. They really can be extraordinarily brave. But in general terms, you don't want to shit doing stuff like this. You just don't. Mitch, Aaron?
No, I agree. Nothing more than I can add to that. Thank you, Jake.
Mitch, anything?
All I'm thinking of is that base that got painted on by those Palestine types, where it was a woman in charge of a base, and they go, yeah. No one really thinks. I mean, I mean, for example, even if you were to come across, let's say, 6-foot woman, how many blokes would be intimidated by a 6-foot woman? For argument's sake,
Mitch, Rachel Pizzoletto is a 6-foot woman, all right? She's absolutely drop dead gorgeous, but I wouldn't be intimidated by her, of God's sake. She's a swimsuit model for anyone who doesn't know. But she's drop dead gorgeous, but she's 6 foot tall. Endless legs. And yeah, lovely. But whatever. All right, Israel. Let's do this. Like outside of the fence.
It's worth noting, Matt, Israel, they're trying to phase out conscription for women because they've found that it's not really doing them any good to have women on the front line.
Just what I was going to say, Mitch. We on our side of the fence, we don't often have a lot good to say about Zionism. But in Israel, the Israelis for a while tried to make conscription equal in Israel, and they wanted to use women as combat soldiers. But Israel found out that women are just no good at that role, and as Mitch just correctly pointed out, have basically got rid of it, or they're trying to anyway. They don't want women in frontline combat roles because they're no damn good at it. Aaron, Mitch?
All I can say is they're doing the right thing.
Look, guys, I'll tell you, the British Army in the 90s did some tests, and I know the US Marine Corps did some very similar tests. But in the 90s, the British Army, they tested all female sections, mixed sections, and male sections. And that's like about 8 to 10 guys, okay, a section. But they also did the same thing with platoons. And a platoon is about 30 guys. And 3 of them make up a company, which is one of your basic military units. And the British Army did tests with all female sections and platoons. Other nations call sections squads, but it's the same thing. It's about 10 guys, 8 to 10 guys. But the British Army did tests with all female sections and platoons, all mixed sections and platoons, and male sections and platoons. And invariably, always, no possible way of looking at it any other way, that all male sections and platoons always won, always, and by a lot. The all-female sections and platoons were bloody awful. The mixed ones were pretty bloody awful, and the male ones were always easily the best. Just because it's military stuff and men are better at that than women are. Now, I have had this argument on X, on Twitter, with people sometimes, that women can be just as good on warships as men. Well, yeah, up to a point. But first of all, they have to be absolutely decisive, and women generally are not. And secondly, if you're on a warship and your warship has been hit and is sinking, shall we say, if you're a 200-pound bloke in a compartment that is flooding, and your only oppo who is still okay in that compartment is a 90-pound woman, she ain't moving you out of there and you're drowning, mate. This is the same reason why women don't make good firefighters, because you know what? I'm a 200-pound, 6'2" bloke, and I could probably just about move a 15-stone obese woman out of a burning place. But if I'm a 200-pound bloke and the person coming into that room is a 90-pound woman, she ain't moving me and I'm dying. That's why women are no good as firefighters. That's why women shouldn't serve on warships. That's why women shouldn't be in the military. I'm sorry. To be an infantry soldier, you've got to be able to carry 80 or 90 pounds weight of ammunition and kit and everything else you need, and you've got to be able to do it for several days. Most women can't do that. They just can't. I mean, we were talking earlier about we were talking earlier about why women couldn't find the shield ball, where you required strength as well as skill. And, you know, no amount of skill makes up for strength. It doesn't. It might sometimes in a one-on-one fight, but more than one-on-one, it never does. It never does. I'm sorry. Strength, bulk, and also bloody mindedness. More than one-on-one, I don't care if you're fucking a female version of Bruce Lee, you still ain't winning. More than one-on-one.
I'm just going to add, Duke, that because women can't do these things, whether it's the military or the police, the firemen, fire brigade, of course they always lower the standards to make sure they can do it, make sure they fit the quotas.
Absolutely, that's what they do. They just lower the fitness standards, and women still don't pass them, by the way. They even still don't pass them. And the other thing women do these days, of course, is if your unit is going to be deployed overseas and it's somewhere that chicky babes don't want to go, all of a sudden a huge number of them become pregnant. And then you can't be deployed overseas. And lo and behold, if 9 months later no baby results, nothing happens to those women. You know, nothing happens to them. A wood pit 420, men don't just have more upper body strength. We have much thicker bones and we have more muscles generally. This is why because we've had all this nonsense with trannies, with so-called trans women, which are just, you know, mentally ill blokes, basically, performing in female sports. They always win because blokes are just bigger and stronger and able to do that stuff more. This is why trannies, like men, mentally ill men pretending to be women, they'll win every women's swimming event, tennis event, running, cycling, you name it. They'll win all of them because they're just bigger and stronger. And it's a con job. But it's also why women make piss poor infantry soldiers. They don't make very good tank soldiers either. Because, for example, the loader on a modern tank has to lift great big heavy shells and shove them into the breech. And there are psychological reasons as well that make women not very good at these things.
I don't know if you saw that video where Spanish artillery woman, she tried to fire a cannon, like pulling the cord, and she couldn't do it. Like 5 goes at it. It had to be left up to like this 6 foot tall Spaniard fella to do it instead, because he just got cheesed off, shall we say.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, it's quite funny actually. This chick tries to fire this gun several times. She's just not strong enough. It's like God, there are so many examples. As I said, the most popular video I ever put on X on Twitter, and you can go and look it up, was a couple of British Army chicks who literally could not climb a 5-foot wall. And they tried, like, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 times. And eventually the NCO instructor tells them to just go around. Well, that's going to terrify our enemies, I dare say. And they didn't even have their pack and their kit on, and they weren't carrying a rifle. They weren't carrying anything, and they couldn't get over a 5-foot wall. Like, give me a break, They can't do the job. Why are they in the unit? Duke Valentino says women's football is like a Monty Python sketch. Yeah, you can get the England national team of women to play an average 14-year-old boys team, and the 14-year-old boys will beat them every single time. They'll beat them, probably by quite a lot, actually.
Yeah,
Joke.
yeah. I haven't watched it, but I'm not that Demi Moore film, G.I. Jane. I wonder how much damage that had done in terms of trying to get this idea that some women can actually be in the army, especially in the Marines, of all things.
Yeah, I've never watched it either, mate, and I never will because I won't watch bullshit. But it is what it is.
Yeah, it's kind of one of the things where I kind of find poetic where like stuff like she has to almost dress like a bloke, and she even has to like shave all her hair off and stuff. But she just has to destroy her own femininity just to have this whole point of, oh well, women can join the military. I go, okay, but you have to destroy what makes them women to begin with. And it's just, I just never understood why that. Well, I can get why the message. I don't get how people can accept the whole message of women should join the military, because in order for women to have any chance of it, they'd have to strip themselves of what makes them women, actually their femininity.
Yep, I agree with that. Aaron, anything?
It's just ridiculous that they shouldn't be there, frankly. Not only because they're not physically capable of doing it, but also the battlefield's not a place for a woman. It just isn't. It's a sign of a declining society that we put women in harm's way.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, if you're, I don't know, let's think of if you're China, if you're communist China, or even if you're Russia, looking at British Army or Royal Navy girls or RAF girls, they just must think, yeah, we'll win that war easy then. That's all it does. Same thing with the Americans, where you have these fat black African American women. One of whom recently, by the way, went up on the mast of a warship and put some Netflix or whatever it was thing up there, which actually made the radar not work properly. And she was an NCO. She wasn't an ordinary sailor. And just made that warship completely vulnerable to the enemy. Why? Why do you have these people? It's just stupid, Can
I just say, Valentino in the chat has a comment about, weren't Irish women very effective fighters against the Black and Tans? No, they weren't. That's a modern myth, the idea of women being heavily involved in the IRA during the Irish War of Independence.
Well, you know what they did do, Aaron?
Spies.
In my time in the army, what the provisional IRA, the scum, did was they would get a couple of young Provo chicks to chat up a British Army soldier in a pub, and then he would go with these women, as a man will do with cute chicks, and then some Provo would execute them by shooting them in the back of the head. That's what they used to use women for, mate.
That's what the Provos did. In the Irish War of Independence, they were mostly used for sort of spying inside offices. So famously, the IRA had a couple of female spies inside Dublin Castle who were passing information to them about what the British were doing. So but they weren't involved in the Irish War of Independence in combat, in any kind of combat scenario. They were, if they were involved, they were involved in that sort of intelligence side of things.
Duke Valentino says, how often did these honeypots occur? I think only 2 or 3 times. Yeah, it was enough. When I served in Northern Ireland the first time in 1983, we weren't allowed out of our base at all. We just weren't allowed out because of shit like that. So, yeah, there you go. But yeah, I don't know, guys. As I say, women don't belong on the front line. They can't do the job. Even if they can do the job, even if a few of them can do the job, they do it way less well than men. Let's talk about the one recent Royal Navy case where a Royal Navy woman captain who had been promoted way beyond what she should have been because she was a woman and the Royal Navy wanted a woman captain. She was having some of her female friends on the warship into her cabin, right, into the captain's cabin. And some of these friends were not officers, they were just ordinary otherings. And she was having this girls' night in her cabin while her warship was doing serious exercises, and the warship had to suddenly change course because the officer of the watch on the bridge had to make it change course, and people in this woman captain's cabin were injured, and some of them sued the Royal Navy. Not because, you know, my captain was an incompetent bitch and should have been on her bridge, but because the Royal Navy warship had to make a sudden change of course and I got injured because I'm a woman. But this is constant. In New Zealand recently, a very expensive New Zealand warship ran aground, caught on fire and burnt to the deck and was destroyed and sunk. And she was originally British, by the way, the captain of this ship, a woman. But I saw on Twitter, on X, all the modern British and other modern lefty liberal feminist arseholes saying, oh, no, it wasn't her fault. It wasn't because she was a woman. No, okay, it wasn't. If you say so. Pure coincidence, I'm sure. Woodpit 420 says they were probably watching Netflix. Yeah, or drinking wine or whatever they were doing. Yeah. But yeah, women don't belong on the front line of the military. Even if they can do the job, they do it far less well than men do. And if we have too many women in our armed forces, and the Royal Navy, the British Army, and the RAF do, at the moment, have far too many women, we're going to lose when we fight. We're just going to lose. Because our enemies don't do it. They're not foolish. They don't do it. Aaron, Mitch, any final thoughts on this stuff?
Not really, other than, like you say, they shouldn't be involved in combat roles. They can be involved and should be involved in other areas like driving, general sorts of auxiliary support stuff, but women should not be on the front line in combat roles at all.
100% agree, mate. Mitch, any final thoughts?
I mean, I think like the only time where I know it can be excusable to see women in terms of like doing like frontline stuff is in like a fantasy game or something where it's not even real, but even men back in sometimes I don't know it's kind of like, let's say, Laura Croft, you know, a lot of the stuff she won't be able to do in real life,
Great
but it's
tips
just kind of
on
one of things where
Laura Croft had great
Yeah.
tips. But yeah, don't disagree. Mitch, anything you'd like to plug, sir? I mean, apart from our stream
Yeah.
next week, which is going to be on Henry V.
It's like I've thought about doing my own stream because I'm reading a biography about Putin at the moment, which is quite interesting in terms of let's just say how nuanced the guy is. Like, he's not a good guy. Like, he's not like a massive superhero or anything, but he's not exactly a full-on villain either. But I don't know how interesting that would be for other people. Yeah, it's like I think because I read this one funny quote from a biography where it goes, apparently Putin said about his wife Ludmilla, if anyone could stand his wife for anything longer than 3 weeks, that guy ought to get a monument.
Yeah, I don't hate Putin, and he sure ain't Putla, as some people claim. But whatever. You should do that, Mitch, if you want it. But I would just plug next week. This history stream is going to be Henry V, and it's going to be Mitch and I, and anyone else who wants to join us, of course, from my Discord, talking about Henry V. And we're not mostly going to be talking about Agincourt. We've covered that extraordinary battle on this channel many times. We're mainly going to be talking about the stuff about Henry V that no one knows about. And I'm looking forward to that. So yeah, come and join us for that. Aaron, would you like to plug your channel, sir?
Yes, thank you. I've got my channel is Aaron Hook, and I mostly do book reviews, but also do film and TV stuff as well. And I've got actually 2 live streams happening this weekend. One on Friday at 9:30 p.m. British time, which is where myself, another booktuber called Britain, and AI, who appears on here quite often, are going to be discussing the Mafia game. So that's Mafia Definitive Edition, Mafia 2 Definitive Edition, and then Mafia 3. And then on Sunday, myself and Duke are going to be doing another war film top 5 on Sunday at 9:30 p.m. British time. 10 o'clock British time, which I believe is 7 o'clock Australian time for you, Duke, on a Monday morning. And we'll be discussing our favourite classical Greece, Roman Empire war films.
Yeah, that would be interesting, Aaron. I've seen quite a lot. Most of them I don't like much, but yeah, they all have problems. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's quite apt because Nolan has got his movie coming out soon, and all of the early stuff from that looks fucking awful, to be honest. But yeah. We'll see. So yeah, Duke Valentino asked me to answer his question, and I try and do what the chat asks. Do you think most people, women especially, believe in the Marvel superhero chick or the Shield Maiden bollocks? I don't know, Duke Valentino. To me, it's insane. I mean, like, if you're a bloke who's ever been in a bar fight, I assume most of us have been in a bar fight, all right, or around a bar fight. What happens is women run away. They just do. They try and get out of the way. Why would that be any different when there's even more violence involved? every day you can see videos from feminists who say that men beat up and do nasty things to women. Like you can be the skinniest little nerd, and if your woman rings the cops and says there's some domestic violence going on, and in Australia, for example, if you slam a door on a woman, that can count as domestic violence. If you slam a door, not on her, but you just make a loud noise as you leave the room by slamming the door, that can be domestic violence. Now, you see, this is what feminists do and lefties do. They'll say, on the one hand, that women are totally helpless against the skinniest, tiniest nerd of a man. But on the other hand, they should be allowed in the military in frontline roles. Now, to me, there's a lie in there somewhere, isn't there? Because if one of those things is true, the other thing isn't. And you know, hypocrisy, I don't much like hypocrisy myself. Do I think that all women are always at risk from little tiny skinny nerds? No. In actual fact, the vast majority of men are generally kind to women. I mean, I'm even generally kind to women, and I only like some of them. But whatever. So yeah, obviously there's an enormous hypocrisy there, Duke Valentino, and if you don't know that, you're very stupid, in my opinion. But you know, but on the other hand, mostly I like women. Women are beautiful, and a world without women would not be worth living in. Not at all. I wouldn't live in a world that was just men. I'd sooner be dead. Thank you. But they ain't good soldiers. They ain't good sailors. And they're not good pilots either, in my opinion. By the way, I wanted to mention this. The inquiry into the helicopter that hit the American passenger jet over Washington is now pretty much finished. And it was entirely the fault of the female helicopter pilot. And this female helicopter pilot sometimes got vertigo. Now, I don't know about you guys. I think it's crazy myself that if a helicopter pilot gets vertigo, maybe she should not be a helicopter pilot. She was also a commissioned officer. And when her NCO instructor, who was much more experienced than her and a bloke, told her that the tower is telling us to get lower and go left, she gave him a fairly girl answer. You know what I mean? Instead of immediately doing what he said, she said, oh, okay. And he had to turn around and say to her, oh, ma'am, because the thing is, you see, women stand on their dignity way more than blokes do. And if that had been a male officer under instruction from a much more experienced NCO, I think he would have done what he was told to do immediately and not argued. But this was a woman, and women do that shit. And 67 people died as a result, 3 on the helicopter and the rest of them on that passenger airliner, which was seconds from landing. And they must have all thought, yeah, we're all okay now. And the person who killed them was the female helicopter pilot, who was 100 feet higher than she should have been and way more in the middle of the river than she should have been, and who argued with her more experienced NCO instructor, who told her to move. She killed all of them, 67 people. Hopefully she's in hell. She shouldn't be in heaven, that's for sure. Anyway, guys, I think that's our stream. It's not anti-women. It's not even anti-women in the military and naval and air force. It's anti-women in frontline roles. They're no fucking good at it. I'm going to play us out with a tune. There you go.
They're just like lumps of lead in the store. In the store. In the store. In the store. There were buns, bullets for the guns in the quartermaster's store. My eyes are dim, I cannot see. I have not brought my specs with me. I have not brought my specs with me. There were mice, eating up the rice in the store. In the store. In the store. In the store. There were rats, big as bloomin' cats in the quartermaster's store. My eyes are dim, I cannot see. I have not brought my specs with me. I have not brought my specs with me.
Yeah. And that was from Patriotic Archive. Do go and check out his channel. He's got some great music on there. And I thought it was an appropriate one for this evening. Thank you so much to my guests, Aaron Hook and Mitch. Do go and check out Aaron's channel. Check Mitch out on X, on Twitter. And we'll see you on Saturday for our normal Splendid Isolation stream, when we're going to be looking at how many migrant rapes can happen in Britain. And the British government doesn't give a shit. The latest one, I think, was an 8-year-old girl. So, yeah, we'll talk about that. Please give the stream a like. Guys, hit that thumbs up button. And we'll see you on Saturday. In the meantime, don't let the bastards grind you down.